disturbance of ions. Mostly 4 ions we bother about. One is sodium, one is potassium, and is magnesium. Fourth one is calcium. Most of the times clinical scenarios demand that you know the aberrations or different levels of these ions which are likely to be important in management of that particular condition. In addition to the primary disease, these are the ions which keep the cells functioning. So, from your physiology and biochemistry, you would have been told what is the normal levels, what is the normal function of these cations. We will go to the clinical part only, so we will not bother about the theory that we have read. Little bit I will touch upon the basic biochemistry and we will go to clinical part only. Now all of you see this picture. What do you think he is doing? What do you think he is doing? He is donating something in Tirupati Hundi. Huh? So what do you think? See this picture, what is that? Below?
Carpopedal spasm.
Correct. So this person is having carpopedal spasm. This is a big hand. You see it very clearly. You see the flexion of the fingers, making a small bunch of fingers. But you may not see that in typical clinical scenario. Mostly we see in infant of diabetic mothers who is born within a day or two, or children who are born preterm. A preterm baby weighing 1.2, 1.3 kg, suddenly they have spasm, the hand will not be visible. It will be going to 2-3 fingers like this. If you miss it, you will throw a convulsion within few hours. So, it's important that you look at the limbs to see whether there is a spasm of any finger or any other posture that is not normal for that particular case. Again, I will repeat, these are the two scenarios where you come across this, and that's an emergency. Infant of diabetic mother and a preterm baby. They are mostly in a state of low serum, which carpopedal spasm is due to. So, low level of ionized calcium. So, mostly this condition comes when there is disturbance of the internal milieu due to a particular disease. Close that door. Hello. Close it. Internal milieu due to a particular disease, and always not necessarily due to the doctors. Every time you come, you should close it. How can it be open like that? You will go and open it indefinitely. Now only in cinema this happens. Pre-booked a ticket, anytime you can enter and go out. That is not so in a class. That disturbs everybody. You cannot bolt it. You cannot enter anytime that you want. Bolt. Irrespective of whatever your dean says or anybody says, you don't have the right to enter at any time. I give more than 5 minutes for somebody to enter, and after 5 minutes it is not necessary to enter. And no one is failing because you did not enter in a particular class or one attendance. Then your attendance will be. So in addition to the primary disease, the change in internal milieu which demands correction, without that you will die because of the change of electrons. Yes. Next. So we are discussing about serum calcium. Calcium is a divalent cation, mostly maintained by 3 mechanisms. One is what you take from diet. You don't have the whole day, please come. You don't have the whole day. So you take calcium in the form of the diet. Either it is plain calcium as a form of drug formula, or the diet containing calcium, mostly milk and milk-based diets. Second is parathormone secreted from the parathyroid gland, which helps in maintaining serum calcium level by reserving the calcium from the bone. That is the main site of calcium deposit and a store. Third one is vitamin D3 in active form, and to some extent it is contributed by one more factor, that is called fibroblast growth factor 23. Fibroblast growth factors mostly work at the basic cellular level that stimulates the generation of calcium ion from the sources where it is not ionized form. Actually it is a agent, not a source producer. And we need calcium in ionized form for its functionality. Even if you have tons of calcium inside and that is not in ionized form, it will be like there is no calcium for the functional purpose. So roughly 50%, 45% or so is in the albumin bound form, and the rest 50 to 55% are in the ionized form. And functional impedance is only those which are in ionized form, they are useful. So mostly those are in phosphate and citrate, they are not useful, which is only in free ionized state, they are useful. And if you have fall in binding sites, those who have hypoalbuminemia, can you name a condition where you have serum albumin low? Any condition? Nephrotic syndrome. So that is typical condition in the human body because of albuminuria, there is low albumin, and approximately for each gram fall in albumin below 4 grams, you lose around 0.8 milligram percent of ionized calcium. Roughly remember 1:1, that is fine. That is fine with me. So if you have serum albumin low, the binding calcium ion level will be low, and to release it in ionized form when there is a demand will be low. So even if you have serum calcium in the bone, it will not be useful in the systemic functional use. So whenever you need, it should be available for the functional purpose. Let us see what are the functions of calcium next. This regulation is, you know, in biochemistry. Next. What are the functions? So functions are mostly at the cellular level, at the contraction of the muscles. How does muscle contract? How does muscle contract? What are the two proteins that slide over each other? Actomyosin complex, actin and myosin, they slide on each other in presence of ionized calcium. This divalent cation enhances this bonding, actomyosin complex. Then there occurs a contraction. Next, the same thing, ionized calcium is necessary for motor inflate transmitter of impulses and nerve conduction at the nodes of Ranvier. When the impulse is jumping on the surface of the myelin sheath, it needs ionized calcium. And it is also useful for coagulation. Which coagulation factor is calcium? Yes, that you have forgotten. Correct. 4. So calcium is coagulation factor 4. When it is below 2 milligram percent in the body, you are likely to bleed. So it is necessary for maintaining a bleeding hemostasis. And of course, some of the enzymes need in the form of activation of enzymes, you need calcium. But we are bothered about these three things. One is contraction of muscles, neurotransmission and bone. These three. And bone formation is a complex mechanism. And when there is a calcium and phosphate combination in a proportion 10 and 4, there occurs a good bone formation. If any of these is deficient from this ratio, that is 10 calcium and 4 phosphate, you are likely to have a defective bone. You can have a long bone, but that will not be strong enough. And bone is a source of calcium. When they are deficient in the serum calcium, it is likely to come out of that bone and maintain a serum calcium. So as far as possible, body tries to maintain serum calcium level between 8.5 to 10 to 10.5, really 10.5, 8.5 to 10. It's a very narrow range of 2 milligram percent only. And if this narrow range is changed due to any condition, say it is below 8.5 milligram percent, you are likely to have hypocalcemia. All the hypocalcemic states do not manifest with clinical conditions, but it reduces the efficiency of the system where it is likely to be used. For example, muscle contraction will be weak, so you will feel weakness. You may not stand for a longer period. The exercise output will be less. And same thing with neurostimulation. There can be unregulated hyperexcitability. That is what leads to carpopedal spasm. So, as far as possible, at least half should be ionized calcium, around 5 mg/cent. So, normal level I said is 8.5 to 10.5. Only 2 mg range is there, and half of that will be ionized calcium. Some people believe it's 45%, some say 50%. It is easy to remember half. So half is ionized calcium. If there is a minimal change in ionized calcium, you are likely to be symptomatic with complications. Next. This part we will not discuss in detail in the 5th semester. When the calcium deficiency occurs, mostly it is because of malabsorption of calcium from the gut. Calcium is a divalent cation. What are the divalent cations we absorb from the gut? Iron. In ferrous form, that is also divalent. Next. Magnesium, zinc, all of them are divalent cation. If you refresh your plus 2 knowledge, most of the times there is interiorization inside the gut, proximal intestine. Interiorization is when it is touching the cell surface, it goes inside, pumped inside at the exchange of another positive ion. That occurs almost always in a divalent form, plus form, not plus. So always calcium competes with all of them when they go into the cell in the proximal intestine. So whenever there is malabsorption or combination of another divalent cation, for example, I give calcium, iron and zinc, all three together, then all the three competitively will inhibit the absorption of each other. So even if you expect and calculate the dose, normally calculate 50 to 75 mg per kg per day. So if you give zinc along with that or iron along with that, you will get half of that. That is, essentially you are giving only 25 mg per kg per day. That is less than the clinically demanding drug. Next is, if there is deficiency in vitamin D. Vitamin D enhances absorption of calcium from the gut, plus it enhances in necessity both way in the bone. Presence of parathormone, it enhances the maintenance of serum calcium by pulling out the serum calcium from the bone, and that is both way tract. So deficiency of vitamin D will lead to less in calcium, so multiplication of 10:4 will not happen, so you will have weak bone. And in developing countries, most of the instances it is vitamin D deficiency that is responsible for hypocalcemic state or ionized calcium state, which manifests with complications. Then of course, if there is simultaneous hypomagnesemia, to compensate for that, some of the calcium ion is used at the functional level, so that becomes less available ionized calcium. So if there is a resistant hypocalcemia in spite of treatment, your attention should go to correcting the magnesium. We will not bother with the receptors, we don't bother. Next. So what will be the clinical features of hypocalcemia? So clinical feature depends on how faster you develop hypocalcemia. If it is slow over years, can you give an example? Over years someone will have hypocalcemia. Your calcium level is normal. Yes or no? Yes. Suppose you have low calcium for say 10 years. What will happen? Renal failure. Renal failure is a cause of hypocalcemia, not an effect necessarily. You will have osteoporosis of the bones. You can have a fracture, meniscus fracture. That occurs usually after the age of 55-60. So if you have less calcium for a longer period, you will have, so if a child has low calcium for a longer period, what will happen? So, what is the consequence? So you come out of biochemistry, but in real sense, what will happen? What will happen to a child who has low calcium for a longer period? So what is the consequence? Simple common sense, his growth will be affected, no? So what is the outcome? Stunting, good. So late relation of remote memory, there will be short stature. The skeletal length will be compromised, correct? So the height will be compromised, we call it short stature. Something else happens in a girl. What will happen to the girl? In adulthood, yes, first are there. They'll have contracted pelvis and cephalopelvic disc proportion and leading to obstetrical level. So that is the consequence of chronic low calcium. The same thing happens in a older adult, say after 35 or 10 years. He will not have any of these differences, but he will have poorly strong bone and they are likely to have fracture with minimal stress, and many times these green stick fractures are forgotten. Minimal pain, they might have taken some analysis, forgotten, and rarely there occurs bending at pressure points. So splaying that occurs in rickets does not occur in older individuals, but there occurs bending. And there may be reduction in height if the vertebral bone is resorbed into the system. So at this age also you can have low height, reduced height by 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter if the vertebral bone or calcium is less. So if it is chronic, we are not likely to have any major dramatic symptoms. If it is acute, you are likely to have all the symptoms of low ionized calcium, starting from tetany, convulsions, and you are likely to have acid bleeding if the serum calcium falls below 2 milligram per cent. Second is how severe it is. If it is severe enough, you are having bleeding and convulsion. Less severe, you will have a tetany, and still less severe, you will have only weakness and fatigue. That's all. Nigeria, all of you heard of? Nigeria, a country in Africa. All of you heard of that country? Yes. So in India, the commonest cause for a hypocalcemia and hypoformation of the bone is because of vitamin D deficiency. In Nigeria, it is due to calcium deficiency. Calcium deficiency. Though they are dark skinned, more darker than the Indians. So vitamin D is synthesized on the skin, correct? All of you know vitamin D is synthesized on the skin of the individual when exposed to light, correct? Which light it is? Sunlight. But you can have it in this light? No. Which way of the sunlight? Which way is this? We have this tube light that we use for photography. So ultraviolet B light, ultraviolet B, which is responsible for carcinoma on the skin. So squamous cell carcinoma is because of exposure of ultraviolet B. The same ultraviolet B enhances the formation of vitamin D from the cholesterol ring. What is that ring called in cholesterol? From which ring is cholesterol, this hormones and this thing are there? CPP ring, cyclopentanone pyridophenoxy ring. If you remember, two hexagons on top of that on pentagonal, from their sides, hydroxide, we are that in biochemistry. So this vitamin D is synthesized from that only when exposed to ultraviolet B, which is carcinogenic. So the higher you go, the more ultraviolet B. So if someone who stays in the mountain, he is likely to have more of a carcinoma, but a strong bone. So if it is inadequate sunlight, you are likely to have less of vitamin D, and consequences, absorption will be less, bone resorption in demand will be less, so you are likely to have persistent state of hypocalcemia. Whereas ours is a different issue. So depending on the severity, you can manifest. Next. So if it is chronic, you are likely to have muscle weakness only and easy tiredness. Very small amount of physical exercise, you are tired and you don't feel like the urge of doing exercise. And if it is lasting for a longer period, here are some psychiatric symptoms. The worst I would say is paranoia. Hallucination, of course, all of us have about something. Paranoia, none of us have. At least normal individual will not have paranoia. That I will not think that she is killing me or that he is killing her. So this paranoia feeling has led to many such social disturbances when you have a long range of people who are having chronically deficient serum calcium, which is not manifested with dramatic clinical pictures demanding attention to physician or community. So these psychiatric problems are mostly associated with low grade hypocalcemic state for a longer period. So now of course it is a fancy now to give vitamin D to everybody And vitamin D has been known now to modify the genetic expression of almost 100 genes in the body. So, as you go in clinical medicine, every chapter that you read, there will be one utility of vitamin D. Every chapter that you read in a clinical book, there will be one utility of vitamin D and one symptom due to deficiency of vitamin D. Every chapter, any system you read. So, if it is a chronically deficient vitamin D or calcium level, you are likely to have paranoia and depression, psychiatric symptoms. Prolonged QTC is one of the sensitive markers of calcium deficiency. Corrected QT interval. It crosses 420. So how do we elicit that this person is having tetany? You have to have a blood pressure cuff. Increase the systolic blood pressure to at least 20 millimeters above the normal systolic blood pressure. Keep it for 2 to 3 minutes. So if there is calcium deficiency, especially iron calcium deficiency, we will have that carpal spasm. So that is called Trosil sign. Which other condition you test with the blood pressure cuff elevated beyond systolic? Any other test? You take midpoint of systolic diastolic and keep it elevated. Hess test. We look for thrombocytopenia evidence. When there is a vascular fragility or thrombocytopenia, we will have mercury spots below the BP cuff, around 1 square centimeter area. And you count the numbers. Yeah, in dengue. Not necessarily dengue is one of them. Any condition where you suspect there is a thrombocytopenia, this test is done. That is called Hess test. The same test, but here the systolic is, this blood pressure is above the systolic BP, around 20. In that case, you take a midpoint between systolic and diastolic, or only systolic, and keep it for 1 to 2 minutes. So, if there is a spasm, that gives an implication that you are probably dealing with a condition where there is excessive irritability of the motor components of the nerve, which is supplying the, which nerve supplies this area? Which nerve supplies the palm? Segment you can say? Mostly flexors supplied by. So this side is supplied by C7, this side is C5, 6, and 7, C1. It rotates like this. So these motor components are compromised, that is hyperexcitable. So if you stop temporarily the blood supply, then ionized calcium, which is minimum requirement to maintain a normal contraction and relaxation, so that tone is not met, it becomes hypotonic. Then there is spasm. Same thing, you can elicit the Vostick sign, wherever the facial nerve is coming out, there is stylomastoid foramina, you just tap it, there is spasm, or some people tap on the diagramma here. So facial nerve comes out and divides like this, here around the parotid, just tap it, any nerve that is sensitive, likely to respond with contraction. That is called Vostick sign. Usually this is not elicitable, but carpopedal spasm is elicitable more often clinically. So what happens in acute hypocalcemia? You can have muscle cramp and rarely you can have laryngeal stridor. So children who are not responding to your routine therapy or unexplained stridor, one of the causes is hypocalcemia. And young infants, especially newborns, they can throw a convulsion. So convulsion, stridor and weakness. Mostly we bother about muscle weakness, especially children who are on ventilator. We need the diaphragmatic function there and intercostal muscles function. You cannot win out from the ventilator unless adequate calcium level is maintained. And corollary is magnesium calcium should be balanced in any person who is an artificial respiratory supply. Next. So chronic hypocalcemia can manifest with many complications. As I said, they can have brittle bone, brittle nail, and lethargy, and sometimes paranoia and psychiatric symptoms. Out of them, this nail picture that I have put is one of the common manifestations. All of you see your nails. Some of you will have these horizontal lines. Those who have chronic liver disease, they are likely to have this line, we call it Deuce line. But those who have hypoparathyroidism and long-term hypocalcemia, they have also this horizontal line. Sometimes they are more prone to have fungus infections. They can have a ragged nail with infections around that. And they may occasionally manifest with hypocalcemia and retinal. Paradoxically, in chronic hypocalcemia, there occurs dysregulation of calcium level and deposit of calcium level in uncommon places. One of them is kidney, people have calcification, metastatic calcification of the kidney, well in nephrolithiasis, that occurs both in hypo and hypercalcemia, and on the lens of the eye, that is cataract. So this concept is against that excessive calcium only deposits in abnormal tissues. So whenever you have dysregulation of calcium, when the body requires a particular amount of serum calcium or ionized calcium that is not available at a particular site, the stimulation goes and that fibroblast growth factor 23 stimulates release of calcium at different levels in pulses. So bone is releasing that calcium and gets deposited in abnormal sites. So you can have cataract even if you have hypocalcemia. So if it is an older individual, it will have fracture. If it is a younger individual, you will have contracted pelvis and short stature. Next. So these two you are bothered about in children, short stature and those who are growing. So rickets is a disease of the growing bone. Whenever there is a pressure point, there occurs splaying, or otherwise also there occurs widening only. And there occurs delay in fusion of the epiphyses. In case of long bones, and in flat bones, they will say supple, soft. So what is that sign we call it? In an infant, you have soft skull. You touch it. They go down as you press like a soft ball. You call it ping pong sign. You press it, it will fluctuate down in your hand, and you can have a wide fontanelle as if you are looking for the brain through that. So a wide fontanelle, soft fluctuating bone, skull bone are indicative of persistent hypocalcemia, probably due to vitamin D deficiency, and the clinical condition is called rickets. Next. So how will you diagnose hypocalcemia? In addition to clinical features, as I said, dramatically they can manifest with convulsion or tetany, or chronic deficiency can manifest with lethargy and muscle weakness only. The measurement is by measuring the serum calcium, and which other items should we measure? Proportion to serum calcium. There should be measurement of albumin, one more. This one, magnesium. All these three go together. If I am looking at the functional status of calcium, I will comment on it only when these three are at my hand. One is calcium, both in ionized form and total. 2, serum magnesium. 3, serum albumin. These three, in a very complicated mechanism, regulate the serum ionized calcium. So that is for the functional efficacy of serum calcium. So any investigation on hypocalcemia should involve at least these three. If it is persistent, not amenable to your therapy, and you think the deficiency has been corrected, then you look for the level 1 above, that is parathermal estimation. Otherwise, it is not necessary to go for parathermal estimation every time. So children in specific conditions who are recovering from protein and malnutrition. You had a class on PEM? Yes? Yes or no? Yes. So while you are feeding a child who is recovering from acute malnutrition, there occurs a condition where he is likely to die with a big liver. What is that condition called? Yes? Anyone? I can't hear loud. Someone is murmuring something? Say something. Who is hanging you for a mistake? But that is the brain will exercise, no? Child who is recovering from proteinized malnutrition, at least severe acute malnutrition on feeding, on day 7 or day 8, develops a big fatty liver and is likely to die. What is that condition called? Refeeding syndrome. Why so much of hesitation in telling that? True, but why there is so much of hesitation in telling that? Unless your brain is exercising, the brain will be dormant and you will not think about anything new. mistakes are committed by humans only. No one will think that you are an idiot because you have committed a mistake. All of us have committed so many mistakes and learned. So don't bother about the mistakes, small mistakes that you commit here. They are all your friends only. So it is called refeeding syndrome or nutritional recovery syndrome. And mostly it is associated with hypophosphatemia. And the most dangerous part of it is there occurs muscle damage and myolysis, and that is causing myoglobinuria and death due to kidney failure. So whenever you have a proteinase malnutrition patient who is recovering now, you measure extra phosphate there, because phosphate deficiency is most important in two conditions in clinical medicine. One is nutritional recovery, second is diabetic ketoacidosis. Diabetic ketoacidosis. In these two conditions, if the phosphate level is not maintained, we are not likely to have a recovery from the diabetes and muscle, and is likely to die of some other complication, whereas you have treated adequately diabetes ketosis. So we look for what are the measurements we take. You will take serum calcium, both total and ionized. We will take albumin. We will see serum magnesium, and in specific situations we look for the phosphate. So if he is not responding, I look for two other things. One is he in a state of acidosis or is parathermal level. So serum calcium is also dependent on acidosis or alkalosis condition. If the person has alkalosis, it is likely that serum calcium will be relatively higher than the normal level. So if he has total serum calcium of 10, instead of half of that, 4.5 to 5 ionized, he may have 6 or 7. But the reality is should have only 4.5 or 5. So we look for the pH and we look for the parathermal. Okay. Next. This we have discussed. This is only a table from text. Next. So in case of alkalosis, it will get attached to albumin, but total amount will almost remain same. You will have less of ionized calcium in the serum. In acidosis, it will go. Next. So how do we treat? Again, the treatment depends on the condition that you are treating, and mostly whether it is an acute dramatic manifestation with a convulsion and tetany, or it is a chronic condition of only, say for example, rickets or osteoporosis. If it is only rickets and osteoporosis, unless he has a dramatically low serum calcium, a chronic treatment phase is required, and there you go for estimation of vitamin D. So normally in the serum we detect 25 hydroxy vitamin D level, 25 hydroxy D. That is the circulating vitamin D in the serum, reflecting the total amount of vitamin D you have, but that is not the exact reflection of how much of final end product of vitamin D you have. What is the final end product of vitamin D? A hormonal form, 125 dihydroxycholic acid. So that is not reflection of 125, but that gives a correct estimation of serum vitamin D level in the body. Because this 1 and 25 both are dependent on hydroxylation and two other different organs. That is not reflection. So if it is treatment of rickets, you should do a vitamin D level, and we classify whether it is just insufficiency or deficiency. Deficiency we call it when it is below 20 nanogram per milliliter, and if it is severe, below 12 nanogram per milliliter. So if it is only deficiency or severe, either way, which is asymptomatic, treat this treatment with oral therapy only. We will give vitamin D every week, 60,000 units. Tablets and caplets are available, sachets are available in 60,000 units and 30,000 units. Some textbooks recommend 50,000, we cannot give that one. So we give 60,000 units every week for 8 weeks. 60,000 units every week for 8 weeks. How many doses we give them? It needs a computer to calculate. 60,000 units every week for 8 weeks. How many doses? 8 doses. How much it will come to?
4 lakh.
So 4.8 lakhs units. Or you can give a STOS therapy. STOS therapy is single time you can give the whole dose, we give 6 lakhs units. Am I clear? You can give a single dose, that is called STOS therapy, either oral or injection, or you can give 60,000 units every week for 8 weeks. In addition to that, you have to give calcium supplementation 50 to 75 milligram per kg per day, every day. And after recovery, you have to maintain a high level of daily oral intake. How much do you need daily? Each child needs how much of vitamin D per day? Roughly 50. It is considered in international units. So in infancy, you need 400 units per day, and beyond that you need 600 units per day till the age of 70 years. 2 doses only, 400 units per day till 1 year, and beyond that till 70 years you need 600 units per day. So those who had deficiency, they need 1000 units per day after STOS therapy. That is almost 1.5 times the dose. Okay. We'll go to the acute management next. The goal should be to bring the serum calcium to low normal range. So lowest range is 8.5 milligram percent. We'll keep it above 7.5 always. So symptoms are not detected at 7.5 or above. And at the same time, if you are giving large amount of calcium and vitamin D, you are likely to reserve large amount of calcium from the bone also, and that will lead to excessive loss of calcium in the urine. When it crosses 300 milligram percent per day, it is likely to cause nephrolithiasis. So hypercalciuria should be checked. The only estimation to say that you are not having high serum calcium. Next. So those who have cardiac symptoms, that is QTC prolonged or arrhythmia, or they have tetany or convulsions. So carpopedal spasm, convulsion, or cardiac symptoms with QTC prolongation of more than 420, they give injection calcium gluconate. If it is anything other than that, oral therapy is sufficient. Only 3 conditions for give injection. One is who has convulsions or tetany, one who had prolonged QTC with symptomatic cardiac disease, or ionized calcium, which is likely to be responsible for bleeding. Since it is a coagulation factor, it is coming below 2 milligram percent, it bleeds. In these 3 conditions, you need intravenous calcium gluconate, and after that you give maintenance therapy. All other conditions you give oral, but you have to keep in mind what is that pre-existing condition that has led to chronic calcium. For example, I am diabetic fibrosis or a pancreatic insufficiency. So those conditions where there is a deficiency in absorption from the villi, they are likely to be persistent. In those conditions, probably you need parenteral therapy and vitamin D. Both parenteral vitamin D and calcium vitamin D. Otherwise, routinely it is not necessary. If you just increase double the dose, that is likely to be done. Next. Those are asymptomatic case. We will give, as I said, 400 units per day in young infants and 600 infants beyond infancy up to 70 years of age. If you are taking enough calcium, this is enough to maintain a ionized serum calcium above 3.5 to 4 milligram percent, and that will prevent all sorts of complications and have a normal function. So the primary cause that has led to low calcium, the intake was low, that should be taken care of. If the absorption was less, that should be taken care of. Some people who are on chronic drug therapy, they are likely to have compromise in calcium absorption. For example, those who are taking large amount of antacids. Some people are fond of taking Maxwell for constipation. So those drugs should be reduced in the amount, or the calcium dose should be increased. So otherwise, we look for what is causing this calcium deficiency. Whether it is a hypoparathyroidism, or it is vitamin D deficiency, or it is a chronic malabsorption, or it is a chronic kidney disease that is preventing the 1-alpha hydroxylation in the kidney, or it is a chronic liver disease which is preventing 25 hydroxylation in the liver. Any of the disease that is causing a primary cause for calcium deficiency, that should be taken care of. So primary disease should be treated simultaneously unless otherwise. You have rickets. So when rickets is there, all these systems are simultaneously affected, and especially rickets is a disease of the growing bone in children only. So up to the age of 13, 14, this is common, and until that period you should look for the treatment only, not the organ specific approach. After that, when you have no response, you look for hypoparathyroidism and you look for subtle dysfunction of this viscera, major viscera. Next. Leave it. So human milk contains, this specifically I have put because you will not remember, this question is asked in the Viva also. Human milk, breast milk contains 20 international units per liter of vitamin D. It is a very small amount. But the absorption is around 80 to 90%. Almost all the vitamin D is absorbed. You do not need much of lysis. It is a fat soluble vitamin. So fat soluble vitamins needs either succus centricus or exocrine pancreatic enzymes to break it and absorb. Human milk does not need that much enzyme lysis of the fat. So absorption is around 80 to 90%. And it contains calcium hardly 34 milligram. Whereas if you give cow's milk, that contains calcium almost 4 times, 120 milligram per 100 ml. Same with the buffalo milk. So people who are taking large amount of milk, they are likely to go for hypercalcemia. Hypercalcemia. If you are taking also, in addition to that, calcium in the antacid formulation, then they call it milk alkali syndrome. Very large amount of calcium is absorbed, that is likely to cause calcification of the kidney. We call it nephrocalcinosis. And sometimes stone formation occurs, we call it nephrolithiasis. So whenever you are prescribing calcium containing antacid, you see simultaneously whether extra calcium you are giving for bone formation or prevention of bone resorption for an adult or an older child. Next. So we'll go to the next one, hypercalcemia. Normally serum calcium, as I said, is 8.5 to 10.5 milligram percent. But when it is crossing 10.2 milligram per deciliter or ionized calcium of 5.6, we'll call it hypercalcemia. So hypercalcemia is just a disease that rarely you come across when you have mostly iatrogenically produced state where he is either taking large amount of calcium or absorbing calcium because you are giving large amount of vitamin D. And in pediatric age group, mostly it is iatrogenic. In adults, it is associated with malignancy, either lymphoma or Paget's disease. You have hypercalcemia as a manifestation. So it is a rare condition in pediatrics. Unless you are given large amount of vitamin D, especially STOS therapy 2 or 3 times, they are not likely to cause hypercalcemia. When you have hypercalcemia, the presentation is same. They can have a crisis associated with either convulsions or cardiac arrest, or very rarely they will have arrhythmia, they come to you. Next. So there is mild, moderate and severe hypercalcemia. If it is crossing 10.2, we call it mild hypercalcemia. When it is crossing 14, we call it severe hypercalcemia. Mostly symptoms of cardiac arrest and convulsion comes at 14 or more. And body has an inbuilt mechanism of reducing it by reducing calciuresis. Large amount of calcium is excreted in the urine to prevent it from going to 14. And there occurs crisis when there is 16 milligram percent or above. We do not have 16 any time in the body when the functional kidney is there. So kidney can excrete up to 1 gram per day. Routinely we are excreting only 50 to 100 milligram of calcium per day. And when you are giving treatment, you should not cross 300 milligram per day. And if demand is rising because of some complications, and you have 2 healthy kidneys, you can excrete almost 1 to 2 grams per day. But the problem is, when this excretion occurs, there is likely to be deposit of calcium in the side walls of the tubule and rarely a stone in the bladder or ureter. You can have nephrolithiasis or nephrocalcinosis. So whenever the urinary calcium level exceeds 300 mg per day, you are likely to have metastatic deposit of calcium. Since it is not with phosphate, it is not a bone, but there occurs white lines, and that can be reversible. Reversible. Only in the long term it reduces fibrosis. Next. So what are the clinical manifestations? As I said, acute dramatic manifestation will be convulsion and cardiac arrest. If it is chronic, you can manifest with only calcium deposit at different abnormal sites. One of them is kidney stone. And if it is infant, they are likely to manifest with raised intracranial tension. Raised intracranial tension. So you can have a bulging fontanelle, a convulsion, irritability, and rarely you will have a cardiac arrest with short UPC. Next. Next. So how do we evaluate serum calcium level? Same as hypocalcemia, you look for the calcium, albumin, phosphate, magnesium. And if the child is having persistent hypercalcemia, look for malignancy, either sarcoid or Peugeot disease or malignancy. Both sarcoid, Peugeot disease and malignancy are uncommon in children, except for lymphoma, I do not come across them, and that is more common in adults. If you see an adult age 35, 40, you don't have any localization sign of a particular disease, you have only persistent high serum calcium, you look for sarcoidosis, some non-specific shadow in the X-ray, or some metastatic calcification may be there, so look for a sarcoid. Next. Then you look for hyperparathyroidism. As I said, the commonest cause for hypercalcemia is iatrogenic. Large amount of vitamin D is given as dose therapy. Next, sarcoid or malignancy. Third one will be hyperparathyroidism. So, on the basis of prevalence, this is the last one. If it does not fit into anything, you look for hyperparathyroidism. Look for parathrombonation. Next. Next. We'll go to it. So that, just put that slide. So there is a condition will come across, a recessive condition, familial hypocalciuric hypercalcemia. So this is a condition you come across occasionally, but there will be no excessive calcium loss in the urine, but there will be hypercalcemia. It's a familial disease, autosomal recessive mostly, and there occurs metastatic calcification. So you have to look for the serum calcium level and see in the family if anyone else has hypercalcemia with symptomatic manifestation or not. Next. So how do we treat? Go down. Go down. Next. Go down. Go down. Treatment. As I said, both hypo and hypercalcemic treatment depends on whether you have dramatic manifestations of these complications or it is a chronic disease. If it is acute dramatic manifestation, you have to give steroids and diuresis, so that large amount of calcium can be excreted in the urine post diuresis. One diuretic that will not use is thiazide diuretics. They are likely to increase in serum calcium level and deposit in the uncommon places. So you give loop diuretics, furosemide. So overhydration with saline and furosemide and glucocorticoids. Hydrocortisone will give 10 mg per kg, and you can repeat it after 40 days. You can change to 100. That reduces the increased intracranial tension, reduces the serum calcium level, prevents arrhythmia in the heart, and large amount of calcium from the storage sites, wherever it has been deposited, will be excreted in the urine. Next. If it is long term, you need reduction of intake. So if you are giving any salt in the form of antacid, you should stop that. If you are giving extra calcium as oral substitute, for example, the dose range is 50 to 75 mg per kg per day. It comes to 1 gram per day in adults. So you reduce it to below 50 mg per kg per day, and you see that urinary calcium excretion is not crossing 300 mg/%. Anytime that is crossing 300 mg/%, you are likely to invite nephrolithiasis. So I will summarize what I have said. Hypocalcemia manifests with tetany, sometimes with convulsions, especially in preterms and infants of diabetic mothers. It is an acute emergency. You should keep your eye open to see a small hand making a fist, and that fist should be an indication of hypocalcemia. Treat it in emergency to prevent a convulsion. And if there is hypocalcemia suspected, you should do estimation of serum calcium, magnesium, albumin, and selected scenarios do the phosphate estimation. And treatment should be substitute of calcium, enhance the absorption, and if necessary, give vitamin D. And to estimate the level of vitamin D deficiency, 25-hydroxy D level is a significant indicator of vitamin D level in the body, though it does not indicate the level of 125-dihydroxycholecalciferol. And if it is crossing below 20 nanogram per milliliter, it is deficiency, and below 12 it is severe deficiency. This should be given either STOS therapy of 6 lakhs units as single dose, or you can give 60,000 units every week for 8 weeks and calcium supplement. After the recovery, you give 1,000 units per day till the time you are satisfied that his absorption is good and serum calcium level is maintained. In case of chronic deficiencies, simple oral intake of 600 units per day and calcium substitute is enough. If there is malabsorption due to cystic fibrosis, deficiency of pancreatic exocrine pancreas function, or there is deficiency in sulcus and delicus, you should give higher dose of calcium. And do not give 2 or 3 divalent cations at the same time, like iron, zinc, and calcium. You can space the dose. Morning, if you are giving calcium, you can give zinc in the evening or iron in between, not at the same time. If there is deficiency of calcium and vitamin D, in childhood it leads to rickets, short stature, and contracted pelvis. In adult age, there will be short stature and CPD. Hypercalcemia is an uncommon condition in pediatrics. Mostly it is iatrogenic when you give large amount of calcium or vitamin D in STOS therapy multiple times, and rarely it occurs in a familial. There is autosomal recessive hypercalcemia. These conditions should be kept in mind when you have convulsion or metastatic calcification which is unexplained, and estimate serum calcium. And in older children or adults, you will look for sarcoid and Paget disease or malignancy, unexplained malignancy. Rarely we have seen in lymphoma it occurs, but sarcoid is rare in children, so we do not see those cases. So when there is a hypercalcemia, in acute emergency when they come with convulsion or cardiac arrhythmia, you need hydrocortisone and Lasix, furosemide and hydrocortisone therapy. If it is chronic, you can try reducing the dose of both vitamin D and calcium and large amount of water intake. That will lead to calciuria and reduction of serum calcium. You have to monitor if there is hypercalcemia or severe hypercalcemia every 6 hours till the stability. After that, you can delay the monitoring every month once.